The next thing to consider is placement. Placement is kind of key because you're going to be living with these speakers. You can get really small, tiny speakers for surround and surround sound systems. I really wouldn't recommend them. There are a lot of so-called sort of lifestyle systems. When anything is called lifestyle, I know that's going to be crap. The other thing to consider, of course, is the soundbar approach. I'm not a big fan of soundbars, and I've had a few over the years. They're great as an addition to your TV, but that's all I would say they're good for. If a lot of TVs now have pretty crappy sound because the screens are very small anyway, very slim, and they tend to have downward firing speakers, which are not of brilliant quality, and this tends to sort of muddy the sort of the vocal track in mixes, so it tends to sort of make things appear a little bit muddy. And a lot of people have complained over the years that it's hard to hear what people are saying in movies, what the dialogue is. So if you have that problem and you're on a very tight budget, then just get a soundbar. When it goes to sort of surround sound and Atmos soundbars, they're okay. They're not great. They're sort of, if you really don't want surround sound speakers with even Bluetooth, I'm not a fan, but they've got better. They've got a lot better. There's some brilliant ones from Yamaha. Sonos do some good ones now. There's some good speakers, good soundbar speakers out there. But as a rule, if you're really serious about surround, I would look to always move to a proper surround sound setup with an AV amp, speakers, and so on. Or you're going to be blown with what you could get for what you'd spend on a decent soundbar. You could get a really good surround sound system for the same price that would sound an awful lot better. It's not going to be in a nice fancy box. It's just going to be a set of speakers and an AV amp, but it will sound an awful lot better and will be far more flexible. So always consider that first. Never just immediately consider that a sound bar, or even if they say they're Atmos, all they're going to do is fire up sound up to the ceiling. And even the best Atmos speakers that you put on speakers that fire up to the ceiling and back down, they don't sound as good as what a properly placed Atmos speaker, either high up on the wall or in the ceiling, would ever sound. So always consider that. Always look as to a sound bar as kind of a last option. If you can't convince your spouse to have speakers around the room, and they're not that bad. Whether you just, don't assume that because it's an AV amp and there's speakers involved in connections, that it's going to be really difficult. It's actually not that difficult to set up. They're a lot easier than what they used to be. And in fact, they're no more difficult to set up than a soundbar, to be fair. In terms of sort of speaker size, you can have floor mounted, you can have speakers that are sort of shelf speakers. But if you can move towards a front pair of floor standing speakers for the front, and then a good quality sort of center channel and sub, and then smaller speakers for your surround and Atmos, that tends to work out quite well. You get a good sound stage with that. People think that the speakers, because we see these images of sort of the diagrams of where the speakers are, that it tends to be very invasive. We tend to think that they're going to be sort of in our face. And in lots of ways, they're not. They're no more than what they are in the average room, and you can, at most, what most people see in the room that I have in my living room here is that most people just notice the floor standing speakers and they think it's a stereo. And then it's only when they've sat down for a longer period that they notice that there's some other speakers around. So they're very discreet these days. Even even mine that are on sort of on beige walls, and you've got these black speakers. But you can even make them even more discreet because you can get sort of you can get them in colours that sort of augment more with the colouring of your sort of surroundings as well. It's always a good idea to understand where your speakers are going to go, where the placement of these speakers should be. If they're bookshelf speakers, then that's not too bad. You can tend to put those anywhere. If they're more floor standing speakers, sometimes these need to be pushed a bit further away from the wall. So yeah, there's a lot to consider with the speaker placement, and there's also some great packages with speakers, all the way from, I've got some Q acoustics, and I've got some DALI sensors, and they tend to work pretty well together. Bowers and Wilkins do some great speakers as well, and Yamaha too do some great speakers, and JBL do some good ones at the low end as well. So there's some good options there with terms of speakers and good opportunities for you to buy. I know there's a lot of people that say, try and stick with the same brand, and yeah, I would certainly do that. But when it comes to sort of adding Atmos speakers, you tend not to be able to get the same brand, so don't worry too much. The reason I say don't worry too much is because most AV amps now have a setup where they will set up all the speakers so they sound as good as they should be without sort of they'll calibrate the sound to a sound curve for each and every speaker. So it doesn't really matter too much what the brand is, because the AV amp will adjust that speaker channel to reflect to a curve that's designed to work well with surround anyway. So I wouldn't worry too much about sort of mixing and matching brands too much. Just don't go too crazy having a separate brand for each and every speaker. So those are the things to consider with placement, your speakers and your soundbar. So let's move on to the next subject.